Before we begin, we'd like to give special thanks to all of our sponsors for helping make this event possible each year. Specifically, thank you to CRL FormFox for being our title sponsor for 5 consecutive years. And thank you to our platinum sponsors, OraSure Technologies, Psychmedics, Samba Safety, UKG, and Quest Diagnostics. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for another session of Day with DISA. Today's session is on emerging drug trends with a focus on designer drugs, and we're blessed to be joined by Dr. David Kuntz, Director of Analytical Toxicology at Clinical Reference Laboratories, or CRL. Dr. Kuntz, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, before we jump into the presentation, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, use the Q&A button at the bottom right of the player. If there are any questions we're unable to answer today, we'll reach back out to you after Day with DISA. Additionally, we'll make a copy of this presentation available for download in the Materials tab after the session. With that being said, Dr. Kuntz, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you to my designer drug update for today. Looking forward to talking to you all again and cover some interesting aspects hopefully that I can cover for you. So let us begin. Yeah, there you go. You got a picture of me. I am the executive director for Clinical Reference Laboratory, been that for the last 16 years, and we're going to just jump right into this. The presentation today, going to review a few things. Some of this may sound familiar before. Hopefully, CBT isn't new to you. So there's really 4 objectives for today. I'm going to compare CBD to THC, talk a little bit about Delta8 THC, which has been quite the problem, and briefly on some other designer cannabinoids that you're going to find in your local drugstore, pharmacy, whatever. A little bit about benzodiazepines, and then again a little bit about fentanyl and the numbers that we're seeing in our workplace. So we're going to start with CBD, or cannabidiol. Cannabidiol has been around or been identified for a long time, since 1940. So that's 60, 80 years ago, but it's never been that much of a primary compound of interest. It's always been Delta8 THC has always been what we've been focusing on. Now, there are 2 different types of receptors or places in the body that cannabinoids work with, and CB1 is in the brain and CB2 is largely outside the brain. And, but CBD is slightly different. Marijuana, Delta8 likes to attract to the CB1 receptor. You get your psychological high, you're feeling good, those types of things. But CBD does not do that. And that's why they talk about this as being non-psychoactive. Now, the other part that's important for the general population is that CBD is metabolized by the liver. The cytochrome P450 enzymes are what really does the work inside the body. This can interact with your prescription drugs. You have to be careful about that because the enzymes are somewhat limited in how much they can do. So if you hit your body with a whole bunch of more CBD, it can overwhelm the enzyme systems, and you can get abnormal drug levels, which may not be very good. Now, CBD really never had much of a history until we talked about children's seizure disorders, and it rapidly became viewed as a good drug, and in which it did seem to do a great job. And it kind of got stuck there, and then there was the promotion, and many of you probably have heard in other talks about the Hemp Farm Bill of 2018. That opened up the door for the growing of CBD. Now, based on the title of that, it is a farm bill, which means the Department of Agriculture is involved. And looking at the hemp acreage. Now, remember that hemp and marijuana, the psychoactive marijuana, only basically differ by the amount of THCs present. And under the Farm Bill, it has to be 0.3% or less. And in most of the commercial products, it's 20, 50, or you can even get 100% THC. So there are differences in the amount of THC to classify them. So we're only going to talk about hemp very briefly. And, based on the farm statistics, the 2021, the 2022 are still probably in the same range. The value of the hemp market's $824 million. Out of that, there's the oils, there's some fiber value in all of this, whether, for clothing or whatever. You can harvest hemp seeds that are put into products, largely for the fatty acid content. So, but what was surprising that there's 54,000 acres of hemp being planted with the Farm Bill. And an acre is kind of a hard concept to visualize, but converting that, it's 84 square miles of hemp product being grown. One of the other numbers to try and get an idea of what a square mile is, it's about the equivalent of 36 football fields. So we've got a lot of hemp growing out there, and which has led to an oversupply of the oils, and which led to some of these other designer compounds. So a little bit further on this, you get about 1,500 to 3,000 hemp plants per acre. They need space. Some of that, I'm not a hemp farmer, but to grow it well, it needs space and it needs UV light requirements. So the more UV light you throw at it, the more THC you can produce. So that's why you need some space, and hemp can grow very, very tall. So based on these studies, you could get a yield of about 1,000 pounds per acre, or half a ton of CBD. And one plant could produce like 1 pound of crude hemp oil. And for those looking at these products, it's kind of like what they would refer to as a CBD full spectrum oil, which really will have a fair amount of THC unless it's specifically crafted by the vendor to remove it. So this is all great, but everyone wants to make money. The profitability is pretty great, and these are numbers from the state of Kentucky that are saying if you grow hemp, it's $250 to $300 per acre profit. Soybeans are like $30. So there is an incentive to grow something that's more profitable, but certainly with hemp, there's a lot of overhead as well. Instead of using giant tractors and equipment to plant a field of soybeans and then harvest them with equally as large combines at the end of the year. So, but the CBD stores, they're claiming they're making 40% profit margins. 2020 sales were like 4.6 billion. And by 2024, they're expecting it to be $20 billion. Now, we've talked a little bit about, or I've talked a little bit about the liver enzymes, but the bioavailability is important if you're going to use these products. Orally, only about 6% of your product is going to be absorbed in the stomach. So if you ingest it as a gummy or oil, you're going to have a very low bioavailability. Lotions and salves are a little bit better, depends on what they're mixed with, to do absorption. But vaping by far, just as like crack cocaine, you can get that drug into your lungs much faster. Now, there are studies being done by the federal government. Some of that's being done at Johns Hopkins University at their cannabis research center. They're using SAMHSA funds, and CRL and I'm involved in the testing of these studies in blood, oral fluids, and urine. So hopefully, as these studies wind up in this coming year, we'll have more insight into all of this. There's already very interesting things happening as far as trying to correlate impairment with drug levels. This is a quick little chart I pulled out of the literature. Like CBD, I think the standard doses, the gummies are around 25 milligrams. And so you can kind of get a chart. I mean, this is what, the stores are going to promote. So if you want a lot, it's probably 2 gummies per day, or 25 milligrams is kind of a standard dose. Now, most of these bottles are probably good for maybe a couple weeks to 2 to 3 weeks, depending on your usage. So you are involved in some money, and kind of looking around. It's like $60 a bottle. So it's going to cost you probably $20 a week or so to continue doing this. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of CBD that didn't prove to be much was there was belief that you could convert CBD to THC. And I'll show you a little bit of structure. I am a scientist, so you're going to have to live through a little bit of this. And you could create a very small amount, like a nanogram or so, using simulated stomach acid. Yes, there is fake stomach acid to work with. But with the work that we did with SAMHSA and Johns Hopkins, there really is no conversion. If you use pure CBD and you ingest it, your body, if it's making any at all, it's dispersed throughout the body, and we can't find it. So that's a good thing. The bad thing is that the products aren't pure. So there are things such as THC, THCV. There's a whole bunch of varieties. Marijuana's got over 100 products in it. So, the federal program did go through. You could convert carboxy CBD to THC, what we report, using certain specific conditions. But that's all been taken care of years ago. None of the laboratories, at least under the federal program, are able to generate carboxy THC from CBD using their methods. So you're safe from that. That's not a concern. Now, here's a little bit of a tree diagram, if you will. CBGA, that is kind of the mother compound. And out of that compound, we're going to make nearly 2 identical products, the tetrahydrocannabinolic acid and the cannabinolic acid, CBDA and THCA. That is a terminology that we use also in toxicology. So that's kind of the grower language. That's the plant talk. And so when you heat this, and you do need to convert cannabinoids, you got to get rid of this methyl group largely. You make THC. That's what the heating and, whether you're making brownies, whether you're going to smoke it, that's to convert THCA in the little box to THC, and then in your liver is going to convert it and you excrete it. So they're parallel pathways. And so that's why there was all this concern. But the laboratories are able to have adapted, so the testing process is safe. So if we find CBD or THC, it's what you ingested, not the THC is not from CBD conversion. Okay, now I have this here. This is the standard molecule for THC, and we make this THCA, get this little conversion. The thing that since we make almost identical, all of the rest of the molecule is the same, except we have this ring structure is open. So that's the difference. And you go through and you make the hydroxys and the carboxys, just like marijuana or Delta-9, as we talk about. Now, before I forget, we also talk about Delta-8. We'll talk about Delta-8 briefly. And that has to do with this double bond. So if it's over here, it's Delta-9. If it's over here, it's a Delta-8. If it's over here, it's a Delta-10 and on. There's also this little side chain, if you will, alkyl side chain. And, depending on how many carbons you put on, determines how potent it is. So all of these products are very, very similar. And when you go into the research, it becomes very complex. Here we're talking about 2 compounds, and marijuana plants have 100. So we're looking at all of these things in real time. So what's new in marijuana? Well, I've kind of talked about Delta-8. And this has really been kind of a growing concern. It's a growing concern, for the laboratories to make sure that we analyze properly. And, in years past, it was 0.3%, 0.5% in the plant itself. That little conversion, that's that little cousin, if you will, for Delta-9. We changed a little bit, you get Delta-8. But the federal program has always reported on Delta-9 THC because that was the psychoactive drug, psychoactive chemical in marijuana. But, we started with CBD. So, CBD can be manipulated. And so they were manipulating CBD to make Delta-8 THC. And so that becomes the federal program doesn't view it as a illegal substance for the federal drug testing program currently. Now, that may all change as the government gets together with this, but it is not prohibited. It's available in almost every state as Delta-8. And so you can find convenience gas stations, it's taking space. So it's really almost as effective as Delta-9. It may be 50%. Well, you just take twice as much. It has a less intense psychoactive high, which you expect because it's less potent, less anxiety. But, throw this in here, but you still get the munchies. There is one marijuana product out there that's supposed to curb your appetite. We'll get into that in a moment. Now, this is the Delta-8, the non-reporting THC for the drug testing program. So, we started looking at this back in March 20. We started seeing some bigger numbers. It used to be 0. It was at 4%. 6 months later, in October of 2020, it was 8%. By March of 21, it was 18. And then in the middle of last year, it was a third, 33% of all of our marijuana positives have substantial amounts of Delta-8, which means that they're either just taking Delta-8 or it's a combination of some marijuana, some Delta-8, or badly manufactured Delta-8. And this is decided to pull some numbers. This is like from one day. And these are just a part of the samples to kind of give you the range. So if you look at sample 1, we didn't find any Delta-9. It will still trigger, all of Delta-8 will trigger the screen. So all those products are going to confirmation. So sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, sample 4 were negative reports because they're less than 15 under almost everyone's program, especially the federal. But, if you look at the corresponding Delta-8 in those samples, went 335, some are 900, and then you get into somebody that is using a great deal of marijuana products and Delta8, we got to 54,000 for Delta8 THCA. We got 4,000 of Delta9. Obviously, these are positives, but there is a change, a dramatic change in how they're using their marijuana products. When taking a look at who's using them, half of them were pre-employment. Almost 25% were in the random category. And then we had a few others, filling it out, a reasonable cause, post-accident, follow-up, things that, fill out the drug testing categories. So this is a combination of regulated, non-regulated. I had them all broken out in a whole bunch of different charts, but they're almost identical. It's not that the non-regulated group of potential or donors behave any different than regulated. They practically overlapped. Now we're going to go through some of the other products relatively quickly. Delta10, we talked about the double bond ring structure, it's the only difference. And that was kind of created by accident because a couple years ago, California's having the big forest fires. We certainly don't have that going on right now. It's excessive flooding. But when they were spraying their fire retardant, some of that ended up on the open field marijuana crops, and they tried to clean it up to be able to sell it. So they created this Delta10. They have since then realized what they can do. They've reversed engineered this in the chemistry lab so that they can make this new cannabinoid, and it's also on the market. So this one is truly a non-marijuana natural product that would be totally synthetic. HHC is another one that's out there. We have that ring structure. Here's that little marijuana ring structure. We talked about a double bond here or here. This has disappeared. And they made this product this way to make it more resistant to degradation on the shelf. So one of the things that people worry about, I have all of this THC, it's going to go bad, right? So they started working with this to try and figure how to make this a more stable compound. You can put nitrogen, get rid of all the air, you replace it with nitrogen gas or something heavy to get rid of the air that causes it to destroy. So it's pretty good. The claim is pretty good for inflammation. Not quite as potent, but then you just take a little bit more and you get exactly what you wanted. This is the one that's kind of concerning. You can get this as THCP. It's 33 times more potent, if you will, due to binding affinity to the CB1 receptors. And I had talked about these little side chain. These are like fatty acid structures in your body. And so, but if you add 2 more carbons, it seems like it draws it back into your brain much more easily. So it makes it more lipophilic. So the brain is, all about lipids. And as we have heard that marijuana likes to go into the fat. Well, this is the conduit to make it more fat soluble to get it there. So you're going to get these psychological effects, and certainly you're going to have anxiety and paranoia if you aren't careful. We've had the other designer, if you will, K2 products. They're still out there. They're not the ones that we started with, 10 years ago, but they're still out there, and they're very potent. And we probably have heard about, they would get these, they would basically turn into zombies within minutes because they overdose on these effects because they bind to the CB1 receptor. So this is a product that's out there, which I would put into the dangerous category. The acetate, THCO, is kind of an interesting drug. It's out there too. We have, this is an acetate group over here. And it was really developed by the military, 50 years ago. The military took a look at this and decided, it's part of the warfare issue. So if you had an enclosed area, you could infuse that area with this THCO, and everybody would become high from the marijuana. It gives them a different perspective, and hopefully it would become a less violent situation. Now, for those that remember, there was an incident, it's probably 20, 30 years ago in Russia where was a Chechenian people took over this opera house and they put a gas in there, but that was carfentanil. This would be the THC would probably lead to less violence and less death as an alternative, but they've not gone forward with it. But it is a product, and it can get you quite high. This is the product THCV. For those involved in ordering drug testing, this is the one that determines whether you have a prescription chemical drug, such as like Marinol, little capsules or tablets, versus plant marijuana. And again, this is due to the side chain. It's, we get down to 3 instead of 5, which is normal. 7 makes it more potent. So the shorter it is, the less potency. So, this is going to cut the munchies. And I would imagine it would be a product that, Doritos and all the fast food places are not going to promote, because you aren't going to get those munchies and lead to those late night shopping events at a convenience store. But they do claim it's potentially helpful and drug for disease states such as epilepsy or ALS and Parkinson's, kind of stabilize out those nerves a little bit, and perhaps there is a good value in that as well. Chemistry wise, we're doing some of these products. It's just a little bit of color to add to this talk, but these are all the products that we look for in our research program. There's the Delta8s, there's Delta7s, and there's 10s and CBDs and CBLs and CBNs. I mean, it goes on and on. So, the program that we have is looking for all of these. Some of them, like CBN, is being actively introduced with CBD to try and help, like sleep conditions, for insomnia. So this is all part of this blending that goes on to build better products. Now, benzodiazepines, had to give you a little bit of a history. They're changing topics as we try and move through this. Benzodiazepines were really replacing barbiturates. And barbiturates had a very famous movie that goes back, and it led to The Valley of the Dolls. It was a book and a movie, and it was all about things like seconal, pentobarbital, amytal, phenobarbital, and alcohol. Well, they caused a great deal of death, a large number of deaths. If I'm not mistaken, I think Marilyn Monroe kind of got involved in this as well. And there was a lot of celebrity deaths from this. So, being a young guy, never quite figured out, what dolls has to do with this. But it is a slang term for sedative hypnotic drugs. And right now, all those barbiturates are really still available. But, when we go testing, and a lot of people do test for barbiturates, the only two that we really see are either phenobarbital, kind of used for epilepsy, as the primary indicator. There's some other minor reasons for it. And then there's butalbital, that's the other one that's used in migraines. So the other barbs, the old traditional black jackets, yellow jackets, they're all prescription. They're used in the hospital to try and induce coma in certain cases to rest the brain. And so benzodiazepines were developed. The first one was Librium, or chlordiazepoxide, in 1955, and I believe Roche Pharmaceutical was involved in that. And so there was this big flurry. So these benzodiazepines, whether you're doing a Xanax or alprazolam or clonazepam, they're all very useful. And they are far safer than the old drugs, but addiction still occurs. They have problems with alcohol. So as any anti-anxiety drug, alcohol and these are not a good choice. But there are designers, as with any program, there was just as we talked about the marijuana, kind of do all the changes on the sides and all that, they did the same thing with benzodiazepines. And some of these became too potent. It's kind of like that THC, it's too potent. And so they never made it to market. But they can be manufactured. And so they have like 10 times more potent than the prescription versions. You only need very small amounts, like microgram levels, same levels like LSD. And these are not typically reported as part of the benzodiazepine panel. They've kind of stayed under the radar, but they are there. And your typical investigation for accidents and reasonable cause testing usually don't identify these unless you have your panel to look for them. And so we, as a laboratory, decided to look at some of these all here, clonazepam, tisalam, flualprazolam, are all designers. They are not available in the United States, but you can order them on the web, and people are. And so we see these by looking at our benzodiazepine screening data. They're not part of our traditional panels, but we're looking for these, and as part of a surveillance program. We do have some of these available. There is a panel where these are available for you, but just as a notice, they are out there. They are of concern. And by looking at the reason for test, some of these are random. Pre-employment's about a third, but we also have the reasonable suspicion and the post-accidents. So if you wanted to drive a truck, fly a plane, you buy all these illicit formulations to get what to handle the anxiety, and they're an alternative really to saying, well, I'm going to use Delta8. Delta8's marijuana, but it's not regulated. These are regulated, but you can't find them. So they kind of hide there for employers, and it's just something for you to be aware of as you go through and you say, boy, this person is really messed up. I don't know why. He can't stay awake. He's slurring his words, whatever. We did the test. We didn't find anything. I don't know what it is. Well, there's hundreds of other drugs out there, and he found one of them. Now, talk a little bit about opiates, and then we'll close this up. And opiates are quite the little curse that we have going on in society right now. Hippocrates is the father of medicine. He kind of, in the 400 BC range, he discovered that opium was part of poppy seeds, got introduced into China, became a major problem for China well before anything happened in the United States. We talk about opium dens, and I think the British were involved in moving some of this. And 1799, China banned opium to try and remove that curse from their population. But morphine was later extracted, and we got morphine. And by 1827, Merck Pharmaceuticals manufacturing morphine as well. The one interesting thing about the Civil War, which is probably not known, there's a lot of obviously very serious gunshot wounds, accidents, amputations. The list goes on and on. in that crude sense of things. The Union Army had access to opium. And during the Civil War, it's reported that they used 10 million opium pills to try and curtail the pain, and 80 tons of tinctures, which is basically morphine dissolved in alcohol, to treat their wounded. The Confederate Army did not have a morphine abundance. They tried to grow poppies, and so their injured soldiers actually suffered more because of their lack of opium access. So consequently, major drug dependence developed, obviously. Bayer made, 1898, we just don't seem to learn from our opiate past lives. They made heroin as a non-addictive morphine substitute. And they provided free samples. Well, you know what's happened with heroin. Things weren't getting any better. We had our own opiate problems. President Theodore Roosevelt had its first opium commissioner in 1908. The Harrison Narcotic Act in 1914. And then finally, we ended up with the Controlled Substances Act in 1970. We have the category Schedule 1 through 5 that we kind of know about now. So we had waves of opiate deaths. There's really been about 3 waves over the last 20, 30 years. It started around 2000 with the opiate prescriptions, a lot of fake pain clinics dispensing opium or narcotics for people for addiction. Started in the east, southeast. The government kind of got their heads wrapped around that with prescription limits. So heroin replaced it. Heroin became very popular. And, then we got into the fentanyl over the last decade. And 2021, talk about 100,000 annual deaths, and 3/4 of those are with fentanyl. They're all everything seems to be contaminated. And as you probably have heard, fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine, 50 times stronger than heroin. And they're claiming, with all the pills been confiscated and the powder, there's been enough confiscated fentanyl to kill everyone in the United States in 2022. So this is a little bit of the analogs that we have available. They all became quite popular briefly. They're being manufactured in China. And, China kind of put the end to that. They allowed or caused restriction of the manufacturer, but they didn't really control 4-ANPP, which is the starter chemical. And so that is what is the backbone of fentanyl. And, that's being shipped around the country, around the world in 55-gallon drums. And so it's either being, through Southeast Asia, whether it's China or some other country, they have that, they ship it across, hard to control, coming into, let's say, Mexico as a primary source these days, a location, making the fentanyl and shipping it across. And due to its potency, it's hard to find. Now, we're almost to the end here. We'll talk about the prevalence of opiates. We did another small study. We had 300 morphine positives, with little or no coding, and we checked them for the prevalence of fentanyl and heroin. And these are positive opiates. It's not general population, but this combines some regulated collections and non-regulated. But 16% of these opiates had low level 6-am, below the 10 nanogram level. Almost very few people test for fentanyl. 23.7% of these opiates had fentanyl, which tells me they're buying their narcotics off the street. It's contaminated with fentanyl, and they're ingesting. And then there's probably the heroin and fentanyl mix for 10%. We had both. So either they're using heroin and fentanyl, or it's heroin contaminated with fentanyl. So we have a lot of use, which is very concerning. We have thousands of levels, nanograms for fentanyl. It was totally unexpected. And you have all these people driving. We have all of these, nearly, 50% of them have one of those two drugs, and they're out there driving around. If it's below the cutoff, they're driving their tractor trailer because they're below the cutoff. They're driving their vehicle, their company vehicle. They're driving to the clinic to do this. So it is kind of interesting how out of control we've gotten. There is one breakthrough, and right before we wrap up here, there is a vaccine for fentanyl addiction, and it was created down at the University of Houston, which creates antibodies that will block fentanyl from creating a high or pain relief. And it is specific to fentanyl, which could be a very good opportunity to, with some of the people on the streets or people that are addicted to opiates that are buying things on the street, to protect them from the fentanyl overdoses, because people are dropping rapidly from unexpected fentanyl. So there is human trials are scheduled. It's being funded by the Department of Defense, which was quite unusual. Certainly, this is something to truly be concerned with, and I hope we can find a partial solution for those that are trying to recover from addiction, because there is up to 80% of the people are failing treatment for fentanyl. So this is my final slide. Got to have a summary. There's a lot of challenges for drug testing, obviously. The THC variants, the THCPs and Delta8s, they are chemistry projects. They are being created. Delta8's being actively looked at by the DEA. They're not clearly exempted under the Farm Bill, because if you start, the argument is, if you start with CBD, you can create anything you want and it's legal. And I'm having a hard time with that, because for those that remember, you're buying Sudafed, and that's a starter product for methamphetamine. So there are some analogies here, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of this. And part of it is legalization of cannabinoids. How much are we going to allow these vendors to, chemists to make? Because there's so much CBD, it's outdating in the warehouses. There's not enough places to sell it, so they're creating new sources to do that with. Designer-less benzos, difficult to control. They're very addicting. We should be concerned about that, what's happening out there. And the big gorilla right now before the federal government is, should fentanyl be included on the federal drug panel? And coincidentally today, I got an email from a federal drug program asking whether we are testing for fentanyl, and with assorted various other questions. So they are moving to that, perhaps including, it may be 1 year, maybe 3 years, to including fentanyl into the federal panel. So, the laboratories are able to identify all these drugs, but, if we are given the option to go looking, but there is a cost. This is not a fast process for some of it. Some of it is very unique, but, hopefully for the future, perhaps there is a vaccine that can be used that can help us save some of these lives. And, I'm sure the narcotic abuse has touched your lives much like it has touched my life with my extended family, and not being able to control this. So hopefully that will lead to maybe we can do something with oxycodone, maybe with methamphetamine, which has its own set of addictions. So with that, we'll close out, and we'll see if there is time for questions. And thank you so much, DISA, for letting me present this to you today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Kuntz. Let's dive into a couple of quick questions. I know we're limited on time. If we're unable to answer your question today, we'll be reaching back out to you after the conference. We'll talk with Dr. Kuntz, get answers to your questions, and circle back with you. First question, Dr. Kuntz, did you say that you can now test to see if the positive test was from CBD or marijuana?
There is a test that's available that can identify whether it is large, it rates to CBD. There is a number scale that has been developed. It is available as an add-on test for very specific situations. It is not available for DOT purposes. So, work with the TPA. You can get that ordered if it becomes critical.
Okay. Here's a good one for you. Morbid question, but why should I test for fentanyl if it's killing everyone that takes it?
Well, it's really not killing everyone. Those are unintended consequences of fentanyl based on, the little short opiate study that we did. I mean, you have fentanyl and heroin is low levels. So all you need is the drug distributors don't want all their people to die. So they are mixing it in small amounts to give you that extra kick, if you will, to get the extra boost. And they're putting it in the narcotics, whether it's oxys or codeine pills or hydrocodone, but they're also throwing it in, things like methamphetamine. They're putting it in your cocaine. So these are unintended. It's to develop rapid addiction, but it is, there's no reason to believe that it's intended to kill, but you could go for years being addicted and then finally get the wrong pill and it's extra hot and your life is lost.
Okay. And then last question, I know we're limited on time. Are you seeing more benzodiazepine positives each year?
We are. Benzodiazepines are important drugs. I mean, certainly because of COVID and all of that, there's a lot of anxiety going on in the country. And, part of that is that they're turning to benzodiazepines, legitimate benzodiazepines, and then they're also looking for, the super high potent ones. So that's the same reason, you have anxiety, you have more alcohol. And then you add that to the benzodiazepines, and that creates additional issues. So, yeah, I don't think they're going away. There's more. They are known to cause accidents, sedation, along with trying to control anxiety.
Dr. Kuntz, greatly appreciate your time today. Greatly appreciate everyone's participation today. And we hope to see you in more sessions throughout the week. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You have a great conference. Appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Kuntz. Bye-bye.